Well, good afternoon. Our session today is really going to be focused on the subject of a pathway from singleness to marriage. Now, over the years, I've spent countless hours counseling people at every stage of the relationship journey. I've counseled people from singles navigating friendships and attraction, counseled couples who are dating or they're thinking about engagement, and also those who are preparing for marriage, and then also those after marriage as well. So the ring has gone on the finger, and you're talking through the joys and the challenges that do come as the result of marriage. And I say this because what I'm going to be sharing today, at this time now, about guy-girl relationships, this is not just coming from a place of theory, but instead it's coming from years of pastoral observation and pastoral experience, walking with real people in real situations. And I've seen the beauty and the blessing that come as the result of those who would follow God's principles. And I've also seen, that which comes as a result of someone ignoring God's principles when it comes to guy-girl relationships. And in all of this, there's one thing that becomes increasingly clear. We live in a world that is constantly trying to disciple us with its own view of relationships. It really is. Everything from Hollywood movies to TikTok reels, from social media to messages from our schools and workplaces, we have an immense pressure to try to follow a pattern for girl-guy relationships, which, by the way, it runs completely contrary. It's completely the opposite to God's design. And so today I want to lay out really a pathway from singleness to marriage, a pathway that's going to honor God, a pathway that's going to protect hearts, and a pathway that's really going to build to something that is lasting, something that is joyful. And I want to say, especially to parents among us here today as well, this message is also for you. Because one of the greatest challenges that parents face today is knowing how it is to actually guide their children in the wisest way possible, given all the challenges that are around us. And so really my hope is that what we look at today, it's not only going to help teens, it's not only going to help the singles among us, it's not just going to only help the biblical counselors among us, but that it will also give two parents clarity and confidence with the tools that they need to help their children through these critical years and this critical season when it comes to guy-girl relationships. And to do that, well, what we're going to do today is we're going to really look at 5 key points to really try to establish a clear framework in our thinking when it comes to guy-girl relationships and a pathway to marriage. 5 key points. And so without really any further delay, I want us just to jump straight into a first key point, a first key consideration when it comes to guy-girl relationships. And that first key point is simply this. God has placed within most people a natural, deep desire for intimate companionship with someone of the opposite gender. He really has. See, this means that God has created most people with an inbuilt longing, an inbuilt desire to be closely connected with someone of the opposite sex. Now, this is not just a personal feeling. This is not just a cultural trend, but that inner longing, it's actually part of God's original design. We see it in Genesis chapter 2, where God first creates the very first man, Adam, and he says of Adam in Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, he says, "It is not good that man should be alone." It's very interesting, because this is the very first time in the creation account that God says something is not good. It's not yet complete. In response, what does God do? Well, he creates the very first woman, Eve, from Adam's own side, brings Eve to Adam, and when Adam sees her, he responds with joy, as one would expect, and he also with recognition. He says, "This is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh," and then the passage goes down a little bit more further in Genesis chapter 2, and it says, "Therefore, based upon this, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined with his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And this, we see, is the very first marriage in all human history, and what's more, God established this very first marriage. And what it does is that it sets for us a pattern for all future marriages, one man, one woman, joined together for a lifelong, one flesh union. So, what are we saying? What we're saying is that this desire for intimate companionship with someone from the opposite gender, the opposite sex, this is not just random, nor is it accidental, but it's grounded in the very way that God has made us. It is part of His very good creation design. I think we'd agree that most people feel this desire. They do because, you see, God probably puts it within us because it gives us somewhat of a picture of His relational nature. You see, especially through marriage, we see somewhat of a picture between Christ and His church, the relationship between Christ and His church. And so there's something relational that God builds into us. And we see this right from a very early age, don't we? From a very early age, you see little glimpses into this deep, God-given desire of attraction or connection with the opposite gender. It doesn't always come out at a young age in a very romantic or a very mature kind of way, but it's still there. I mean, you only have to watch a group of 5-year-old boys at a birthday party. 1 minute, you go 5 of them all running around and, they've got swords, they're pretending that they're ninjas. The next moment, you get one of them shyly approaching a girl in a princess dress, handing her a squashed cupcake and go, "Here you go." And then they race off as though nothing really happened. I mean, we see that very, very clearly. Or you hear the girl, that very, very young girl, they'll insist that when she gets older, she's going to marry daddy. No one else can have him, he's mine. They quickly grow out of that. But that's because she already feels the inner pull. She feels the connection of loving someone and being loved from someone else. See, these child moments, they may be funny, they may be humorous, but they do point to something actually very real, and that is that the real deep human need that we have, that even before kids understand what marriage is, they're already wired internally for admiration, and they have a desire to be noticed and to be recognized and to be in connection with someone from the opposite sex. And yet, at the same time, it's important to remember that while this desire is good and natural, it's not ultimate, meaning that not everyone is going to end up down the track of being married one day. I mean, Jesus, the very perfect human being, He never married. And it's a reminder to us as we cross-reference passages such as 1 Corinthians 7 that some are called to a life of singleness, and they're called to a life of singleness for the sake of the kingdom. But for the vast majority, for many, this God-given desire for marriage, for companionship, it points to the good gift of marriage which God has created within us for our joy, for our companionship, and somewhat to reflect His love in a very unique kind of way. And so, recognizing that this longing for connection is a good gift from God, the next question really has to be asked is simply this: how do we handle this God-given desire wisely? Or how do we honor God in the way in which we approach relationships of the opposite gender? And that brings us to the second consideration for this afternoon, and that is simply this: choosing to enter into an exclusive relationship with someone of the opposite gender should only be done with the clear intention of pursuing marriage. What this means is that any romantic relationships, they're not just there for fun, it's not just there for attention, it's not just there because I want to pass the time, but entering into a romantic relationship, an exclusive relationship, it is serious and it's a significant thing. You see, entering into an exclusive relationship with someone else, what you're doing is that you're giving them a very special place within your heart and within your life, and that's not something that we should take lightly. You see, from a biblical perspective, the purpose of such a relationship, becoming exclusive with another person, meaning boyfriend, girlfriend kind of relationship, biblically speaking, the only reason that you would do that is to explore whether or not there is marriage is going to be God's will for the two of you. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to know straight away whether you're going to get married, But it does mean your intention should be clear going into any kind of guy-girl relationship where there is going to be an exclusive kind of relationship attached to it. You're not just dating for the sake of dating. You're considering whether this person could be your future spouse who you spend the rest of your life with. Relationships that lack this kind of purpose, lack this kind of intentionality, what happens is that it leads to a lot of unnecessary emotional hurt, unnecessary temptation, and unnecessary confusion. And that is why this kind of intentionality, that's why it's essential. Absolutely essential. However, we do have to take a step back and we have to recognize that thinking in this kind of way, it is radically different than what the world around us is trying to tell us. It's radically different than the way in which the world is trying to disciple us. Hollywood movies, TV shows, social media feeds, they promote a very different message. They promote a message that says relationships are mainly about excitement. Relationships are more about attraction. Relationships are more about personal happiness. It portrays breaking up from relationships as something casual. It portrays to us that commitment is optional, and the goal is often personal fulfillment rather than a self-giving love. And you see, the challenge is that without even realizing it, many of us, and I'd say even most of us, many of the times, many people start to take their cues from Hollywood, from movies, from influences, rather than take our cues for how relationships should function according to the Word of God. And it's easy to be swept up in the emotions and the drama of what's being portrayed upon the screen and think, I want to play this out in my own life, rather than slowing things down and asking the harder questions. What does actually God want for me? What does God want for my heart? What does God want for my relationships? What does God want for my future? Can I just say this? God's design is always better. And that's why we have in passages such as Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23, it's where the writer says, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it springs the issues of life. And now that applies right across the board. Guarding your heart, it also includes being very wise and being very intentional about who it is that you give exclusive access to your heart in a romantic, intimate kind of way. You see, starting a relationship without the view towards marriage, if you're just starting a relationship without marriage in mind, it's really like starting a journey with no destination. You will end up somewhere, but it may not be good. It may be far from what you actually expect. Instead, choosing to enter into an exclusive relationship with someone else, it must be done with purpose. It must be done to protect one another's hearts. It must be done to honor God's design. And if you do this, if you take this counsel, you'll resist the shallow, short-term vision of love that the world so often presents to us. You see, it's not just about seeking that which is popular, that which is on the screen, but it's seeking about what is wise, what is best, what is honoring to God and His Word. So here's the question. If exclusive relationships should only be entered into with the exclusive purpose of pursuing marriage, well, this, of course, it raises a natural question, doesn't it? A very important question. When is the right time to begin that pursuit? When is it to begin? When's the right time for that to happen? And really that leads us now to the third consideration for here this afternoon, and that is simply this. The pursuit of marriage should only begin when a person has reached the appropriate age and level of maturity to take on its responsibilities. We get that, don't we? You see, in the book of Song of Solomon, there's a certain phrase that's repeated 3 times, and the phrase is simply this. It says, do not stir up nor awaken love until it pleases. This phrase is found in chapter 2, verse 7, chapter 3, verse 5, and also chapter 8, verse 4. And what these verses actually tell us is that they caution us. They caution us not to awaken romantic desire or romantic love or sexual desire before the appropriate time. You see, marriage is not just about strong feelings towards one another. Marriage is not even just about chemistry between two people. But marriage is about commitment. It's about responsibility. It's about readiness. And that's why the pursuit of marriage, therefore, the pursuit of any kind of exclusive romantic relationship that could actually lead to marriage, that should only begin when a person or people, when they have reached the right stage in life where they're mature enough, spiritually, emotionally, practically, to actually handle those responsibilities, and when they've got to a place in their life where they can both act upon those responsibilities. Now, of course, I'm sure that we'd all agree there are certain examples of people who are clearly not ready to yet pursue marriage, even though the desire might be there. I mean, take the 6-year-old boy that announces to his whole family, guess what? I'm going to marry, let's say, Sarah. They ask the boy, why? Why do you want to marry Sarah? Well, because she always gives me the last cookie in the cookie jar. You'd be like, okay, that's nice, but that's probably not the foundation yet. That's enough of a qualifier to spend the rest of your life with someone. Or what about this? A young boy comes in and says, you know what? I'm going to marry Emily one day. But the next minute, he runs in and says, I'm not going to marry her anymore. She's not going to be my wife. Why not? Because she just took my toy. I mean, clearly the desire was there, right? But there's not yet a stable relationship that a marriage is meant to be. Now, while it's kind of easy to smirk at the 6-year-old who might, see getting the last cookie in the cookie jar as being the qualifier for marriage, we can laugh at that. Well, the reality is that even when people get a little bit older, even when they turn 13 years old, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, they're still not generally in a place to pursue marriage or to act on marriage and those marital responsibilities in any kind of meaningful or responsible kind of way. Now think about this for a second. I want you to think about it practically. Most teens at this age in the culture in which we live today, they are still at school, they're working towards their education, they don't have full-time jobs, they don't have an income to support themselves, let alone support another person. I mean, many don't even have their driver's licenses yet, and so unless their idea of a romantic kind of future involves having mum or dad driving you around and dropping you off places, surely you can start to see that even from a practical point of view, you're just simply not there. They're still dependent upon their parents, upon their caregivers for housing, for food, for transport. Many are still reliant upon their parents for managing their calendar. When to go to things and how to get to things. And you know what? That's completely fine. In our culture today, that's completely normal. It's just a stage of life that you're actually in. But it also shows us why beginning a romantic relationship at this age, it doesn't make any sense. You're not in a position to do anything with it. You're not in a position to actually act upon that, to take it any further. You can't move forward towards engagement or marriage without skipping over a whole season of life, which is absolutely necessary for growth and for preparation. You see, trying to date before you're ready for marriage, it's like planting a seed in winter. It may seem a little exciting at first. Look, I've just planted the seed. But let me assure you of this. It is not going to bear good fruit because the season is not right yet. Now, what this means is that if someone is not yet at that stage, especially if they're through the vast majority of their teen years, they should not enter into a romantic relationship with someone from the opposite gender. They should not enter into an exclusive relationship with someone else. But instead, they should focus on relating to people of the opposite gender. How? Not just locking themselves up in a box and say, I can't talk to anyone of the opposite gender. No, of course not. But they should focus that season of relating to people of the opposite gender as friends, as fellow image bearers of God. Spend time together. Do it one-on-one. Do it in group settings. Serve in ministry together. Enjoy shared interest together. Get to know one another without the pressure or expectation that we've got to try to turn this into something. This is a wise and a freeing way to build healthy, godly relationships without risking emotional entanglement that can't even be followed through on until a certain point in the future. But let's be honest, this is completely foreign, to the ears of our culture today. I mean, everywhere you look, movies, TV, music, TikTok, Instagram, young people and older people, everyone's getting bombarded with a message that says, unless you've got a girlfriend, unless you've got a boyfriend, that is essential to your happiness, it's essential to popularity, it's essential for your personal identity. You see, the world tries to convince you that if you're not in a relationship, that you're somehow missing out on something that's really wonderful. And so get into an exclusive relationship when you can't act upon it, otherwise you're going to miss out. When in reality, do you know what you're going to be missing out on? All you're going to be missing out on is a lot of heartbreak. All you're going to be missing out on is a lot of insecurity. All you're going to be missing out on is a lot of emotional confusion and a lot of wasted times. And many of us here today would know this by way of personal experience. Many young people just jump from relationship to relationship when they're young, and they still carry the scars of those moments right into their adult years that could have been completely avoided if they just waited for the right time. Think on this. God's timing is always good. Think on this. You're not missing out by waiting, but instead, you're taking the time to prepare well. You're guarding your heart. You're building strong relationships. You're building a foundation for something that's going to be far stronger and far more joyful down the road. And so, waiting for the right time to pursue marriage, that's very important. Timing is everything. But not only waiting for the right time, also how you go about that when the time comes, that's equally important. And it's with that I want us to bring to our fourth consideration here this afternoon. And this, I think, is where many people, even many well-meaning Christians, this is where they go astray. This is where they go off track. This is how to pursue relationships when the right time has come. And we can put it into a fourth consideration this way. At the right age and stage for marriage, the first step should be building meaningful companionship rather than immediately entering into an exclusive boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. So we're talking about when you're at the right age and stage to be able to act on that and to pursue marriage, you shouldn't jump in straight away. Proverbs chapter 19 verse 2 says, "Desire without knowledge is not good, and whoever makes haste with his feet misses his way." You hear what's being said there, right? This verse warns against rushing into things without a proper understanding. And when it comes to relationships, it reminds us that rushing into a romantic relationship, rushing into an exclusive relationship with someone else, I'm talking boyfriend, girlfriend type of relationship, without even knowing the person themselves, this can often lead to regret. In other words, just because someone is finally at the age and the stage or maturity level to be able to think about marriage, it doesn't mean that the very first step is to jump straight into an exclusive relationship. In fact, it's much wiser a much more biblical path to begin by cultivating meaningful companionship. Meaningful companionship. This means getting to know someone. Getting to know them in a natural, low-pressure context. Again, maybe it's serving together. Maybe it's spending time in group settings. Maybe it's having real conversations about life, about faith, about values, about your convictions. And it's through this process that you begin to see the other person's character. It's through this process you begin to see how they treat others, how they respond to stress, how it is that they live out their faith, not just how they present themselves when they're trying to impress someone. See, our culture, again, it thinks about this completely backwardly. People start by defining, these days, they would start by defining their relationship exclusively. The starting point for them is exclusively defining their relationship with someone from the opposite gender as being my boyfriend or my girlfriend, and they do so in such an exclusive kind of way without even barely knowing each other. Now, some people will argue and say, well, no, boyfriends and girlfriends is just getting to know one another. Oh, really? What would you think if there was a guy that says, yeah, I have a girlfriend, I've got 5 of them? A girl that says, yeah, I've got a boyfriend, I've got 17 of them. See? Don't try to tell me that a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship is not exclusive. But this is the way that people do it. They start off by defining their relationship with exclusivity, boyfriend-girlfriend, without even knowing who it is that they've made this exclusive relationship with. They often become emotionally entangled, even physically involved very, very quickly, without really knowing the person behind the label boyfriend or girlfriend. They commit themselves publicly to someone before they've actually really discovered whether there's true companionship, whether there's spiritual alignment, or whether there's an ability for a long-term compatibility. It's kind of like putting a ring on someone's finger and then says, well, let's find out who you really are. That's essentially what happens today. And can I just say, that's an upside-down way of doing it. Even more, once a couple has defined their relationship as official, you have to understand here, this is the tricky part about it. You meet someone, you just, at first glance, you have a few casual interactions, and then you say, I'm going to make it exclusive as a boyfriend, girlfriend. The problem with this is it then immediately becomes more difficult to relate to one another naturally. Because suddenly there's all this pressure to try to act differently. You've got this pressure to be romantic, to spend exclusive time together, to try to communicate to one another in ways that match the status of something that is exclusive. A couple starts asking themselves the question like, how are we supposed to act now that we're together, rather than just relating to two people, getting to know one another with honesty and getting to know one another with some kind of clarity? The relationship becomes shaped more by cultural expectations rather than shaped by biblical wisdom. And all of this can really it actually hinders the development of true companionship. And the reason it hinders it is because it shifts it to performance. It shifts the whole relationship to performance. What am I expected to do now that I'm in this boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, instead of just learning to enjoy one another, learning to understand one another in the context of everyday life? So friends, instead of starting with exclusivity and trying to build a friendship on top of that, what we ought to be doing it the other way around. We should begin with a friendship. We should begin with allowing companionship to develop, and we should only move to an exclusive boyfriend-girlfriend relationship once you now both have a shared agreement with a shared direction, with a godly purpose of marriage. That's the only time a person should enter into an exclusive relationship with someone of the opposite gender. You see, one of the most important reasons to begin with meaningful companionship before jumping into an exclusive kind of relationship, or marriage plans for that matter, is because companionship is the very foundation of a healthy, lasting marriage. You see, marriage isn't just about romance. It's not just about physical attraction. It's not just the excitement of planning the wedding. But marriage at its core, it's about walking alongside one another in life forever, side by side, as friends, as partners, seeking to honor Christ as you do so. That kind of relationship doesn't happen overnight. That kind of relationship doesn't happen with a few brief interactions with someone. That sort of relationship doesn't just flourish by looking at another guy's or another girl's social media feeds. But instead, it's built upon shared experiences. It's built upon open conversations. It's built upon spiritual unity. It's built upon mutual respect. It's built upon a deepening sense of trust. In other words, companionship must come first. You see, sadly, many couples, they rush past this stage. There are many couples that like the idea of being married. They have that inner longing of intimacy and the affirmation that marriage will bring. And so what do? They jump into an exclusive relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend, very, very quickly. And not before long, what are they doing? They're planning for the wedding. And let me just say, it can feel exciting. It feels romantic. And from the outside, people are looking in on a couple and going, this is a strong couple. Especially when you see them focusing on the event, working towards the event of marriage, the photos that are being taken, the public display of affection on the wedding day. But then comes the real life, the reality after the honeymoon. And what happens is that they very quickly begin to realize that they hardly know how to do life together. They haven't really built that steady friendship. They don't really know how to communicate well. They don't know how to resolve conflict. They don't really know how to enjoy one another outside of romance. And all of a sudden, they're now having to build a foundation after the house is already standing. But can I just say, it is possible. I've seen it. I've helped couples through this. It is possible. But can I just say, it's much harder. It is very much like constructing a building and then trying to dig out in the foundations underneath that once the house is already erected. You can do it, kind of, but it's slow, it's costly, and it's often quite painful. That's why there is wisdom starting with companionship first. Take the time before labels, before any exclusivity, before emotional entanglement. Take the time to build something solid. You see, a good relationship doesn't come just by marrying someone who you love, meaning the one that you have all the feelings for. It comes from marrying someone who you know deeply, who you know genuinely, someone who you've already begun to walk along side by side in this life and in faith. See, this kind of companionship before exclusivity, it's the best preparation for a strong and lasting marriage. So hopefully we get the point. We've seen the importance. Start with companionship. Get to know one another in a meaningful, intentional kind of way without the pressure of jumping straight into a boyfriend-girlfriend status. But here's the question. What happens when, over time, that companionship grows into something deeper? What happens when there's a clear sense of mutual connection, shared values, and a growing desire to take this relationship even further? Well, this leads to our fifth and final consideration here this afternoon, and that is simply this. When there is mutual companionship and a shared desire to pursue marriage, the relationship can appropriately become committed and exclusive. In other words, once two people have taken the time to build meaningful companionship, and as that friendship deepens with a shared desire to pursue marriage, it is appropriate at that time, with a lot of counsel, with a lot of thought, with a lot of consideration, it is appropriate for that relationship to move to a more committed, more of an exclusive season. And can I just say, this should never be seen as a casual step. This is not something you just kind of fall into. It's not just about calling someone your boyfriend or your girlfriend just for the sake of it. But instead, it's saying, we as a couple, we believe that there is a real possibility that we can honor Christ together in marriage, and we want to explore that intentionally. You see, it's a deliberate move towards a future together. It's not just emotional closeness, but it's spiritual and practical preparation. And because of how significant this step is, it should never be a journey that's taken alone. You don't want to go solo here. In Proverbs chapter 11, verse 14, it says, "Where there is no counsel, the people fall, but in a multitude of counselors there is safety." In Proverbs chapter 15, verse 22, it says, "Without counsel, plans fail, but with many advisors, they succeed." Now, although this principle applies right across the board, right, how much more critical is it when it comes to a person that you intend to spend the rest of your life with? In other words, this season, when you become exclusive, once you've defined the relationship as boyfriend, girlfriend, dating, it is at this point you need to be seeking godly counsel and input from key people within your life. What key people? Well, it's time to be asking the question, what do your parents say? See, your parents know you better than most people, to be honest. You don't think so when you're younger, but they actually do. Their wisdom, their life experience, their perspective, it's invaluable, especially if they're actually walking in the Lord. What do your parents have to say about it? If your parents are resistant, if your parents are a bit hesitant, that should be something immediately you need to be thinking to yourself, I need to take a step back here. I need to be bringing this before the Lord. Number two, what do your spiritual leaders think? Your pastors and elders, biblically speaking, they have been given to you to shepherd your heart. They can offer you biblical counsel. They can offer you biblical insight. They can help you to see whether or not you're thinking about this relationship through the lens of Scripture, through the lens of spiritual health. What do your spiritual leaders say? But thirdly, what do your spiritually minded friends think? And I'm not just talking about, especially if you're younger, very, very much younger, teenagers, just say, what do all my mates think? Because for the most part, their minds probably have the same worldview as Hollywood and TikTok and whatever else has discipled them over the years. But I'm asking, what do your spiritually minded friends think? What do your friends think who perhaps are a little bit older than you, a little bit more mature than you? You see, sometimes friends who know you well, they can see things that you just don't see. Are they encouraging the relationship? In other words, have they seen you both together over a prolonged period of time? Are they encouraging the relationship, or are they a little bit concerned with what patterns they see happening? And so meaningful counsel during this season of exclusivity, it's absolutely essential. But you see, it's also a time to start thinking about why God has actually created marriage in the first place. Now, of course, you're not just thinking about it just at the time when you're entering into a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. You should be started right very, very early. And for parents, I would say that you need to be thinking about this at least from about 10 years onward, talking to your children about marriage, instructing them about marriage, helping them to guard their hearts, helping to protect their hearts. Start giving them a biblical worldview from at least the age of 10. Start sooner, at an age-appropriate level. You can't start too soon, I can tell you that. But I can tell you there are many parents that start way too late. They think that sometimes when the time comes, when they get to the 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, that's when I'll start my conversation. I'll tell you, it's probably too late. It probably really is. Because they've already adopted a worldview from the world, and they don't really have anything else to counter that. And so parents, you need to start young. You need to start them young. Give them a biblical pathway to actually think about relationships. But what I am saying is that when a relationship becomes boyfriend, girlfriend, now you're exclusive. Now you're wanting to think about whether marriage is for you or not. This is where you start thinking about these principles that hopefully you've been taught throughout your childhood. Now you're talking about how do they apply immediately in my relationship with this other person. This is a time to start thinking about role distinctions. You see, marriage is not just for our happiness. It's not just for companionship, but those are blessings of that. Marriage is about displaying the gospel of Jesus Christ through that covenant relationship. And so this very much does mean it's a season where serious thought, serious discussion about biblical roles of men and women, husbands and wives, this is where it comes into it. You know, a couple need to be asking themselves, do I understand what it means to be a godly husband? Do I understand what it means to be a godly wife? And do I believe that by God's grace, both myself and this other person are willing to pursue and grow in these particular roles? It's a time to do this. Seeking counsel, understanding biblical roles of husbands and wives and how it relates to you specifically. And then finally, this is an ideal season, an ideal time to consider pre-engagement counseling. Pre-engagement counseling. You see, while many couples wait till after they're engaged to begin what they call pre-marriage counseling, what pre-engagement counseling is that it helps you to work through exactly the same types of materials as you would with pre-marriage counseling. The only difference is that you do it before the ring goes on the finger. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, why does this even matter? Well, pre-engagement counselling matters because it gives the couple a chance to explore the deeper questions around compatibility, around spiritual unity, about values, about long-term goals before they've made their engagement public, before they've made it formal. Now, of course, if through that process it becomes increasingly clear that that relationship is heading in a healthy, God-honouring direction, well, we'd say, great. The people can then move to the engagement, formalize what it is that you plan to do, and you can do so with a clear sense of peace and purpose. And it's from that point forward, the focus can really shift to the wedding plans. The focus can shift to life after the ceremony. You're not having to wonder or figure out whether or not we're still a good fit. Oftentimes this happens. The ring goes on the finger. You then ask the question, is this person really, I've formalized the engagement now. Is this person the right person? Are we compatible to actually marry? Now, of course, following these kind of steps within this process, it doesn't guarantee a challenge-free relationship. Of course not. But it does lay down a foundation for a strong, Christ-centered marriage that's built upon wisdom, built upon counsel, built upon clarity, rather than just built upon emotion, assumption, and worldly ideals. Well, as we begin to bring the study to a close now, based on what we've considered so far in this study, I want us to really summarize, and I want to summarize for us a wise pathway from singleness to marriage. And I want to do this in 5 very simple steps based upon what's already been discussed. What is the wise pathway from singleness to marriage? Listen up now. Based upon what it is that we've just talked about, we'd say step number 1 is to recognize the God-given desire for companionship. That's step 1. God has placed in you that natural longing and desire for close, intimate relationship with the opposite sex. It's a good thing, but it must be understood and it must be guided according to God's purposes, not just the world's depictions of that. That's step number 1. Recognize the God-given purpose or desire for companionship. Step number 2. Wait until the right age and stage. That's step number 2. You see, although this desire may show up early, acting on it should wait until a person is mature enough to act on and to take on those responsibilities of marriage. In today's culture, I think it's very hard to make a strong case for this happening before the age of 18 years old. If you think you can make a strong case, please do come and speak to me afterwards. I'd love to hear it. But up until that point, the focus before 18 should really be focusing on building healthy friendships with people of the opposite sex. Building healthy friendships without any romantic expectations. And at the same time, it's learning what to look for in a future spouse and what it actually means to be a godly spouse. So that's step number 2. Wait until the right age and stage. Step number 3. Build companionship before exclusivity. When you reach the right age and maturity level to pursue marriage, don't just rush in to a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, but instead grow meaningful companionship, Christ-centered friendships. Let companionship develop before you define your relationship exclusively. I'd be very hesitant to use the word dating at this stage. I really would be. When you're building companionship, I'd be very, very hesitant. I would actually discourage using the word dating. Why? Because you know what I know. Our culture today, it defines dating as something that's exclusive. It equates dating to something that's exclusive, where you are now romantically involved with one person, and there's a cultural expectation, as I mentioned earlier and alluded to earlier on, a cultural expectation of loyalty to that one person, and you are now defined as a couple. Again, if you don't think that perception is right, please do come and talk to me afterwards, and please try to tell me how it's okay to say that I have 17 other boyfriends or 15 girlfriends. You know instinctively and culturally that's not right. And so I would talk about dating. I'd be very hesitant to use the word dating when you're trying to build companionship with someone from the opposite gender. Instead, as a replacement of using exclusive language, it's far better at this stage to use phrases that are less exclusive. What kind of phrases? We're hanging out. We're going to the movies. We're going out on a trek. We're going to go for a swim at the beach. We're going to go and hang out at the mall. I'll summarize it in this way. When you're at this stage of building companionship with someone from the opposite gender, focus your wording more so on the activities that are building that companionship rather than phrases that define your relationship. Is that helpful? When you're at the stage of building companionship, focus on activities that are building that companionship, not on phrases that define your relationship. Now, there'll be no end of people trying to tease you. You're going out to the movies, you're going out to dinner, you're going for a swim or a trek or a walk or going to the mall, or boyfriend, girl. You just have to resist that. Don't succumb to the pressure of trying to define your relationship before the right time. Instead, focus on the activities that are building the relationship, building companionship, rather than defining it exclusively. Step number 4, let the relationship become committed when marriage is in view. That's step number 4. When there's mutual companionship grows, shared desire for marriage develops, it's appropriate for it to become committed and exclusive, but to do so for the clear purpose of discerning whether or not marriage is on the table, whether or not marriage together is going to work. It's appropriate time for a couple to seek counsel. It's appropriate at that time to refer to oneself as boyfriend and girlfriend, because now you're making it exclusive, right? Remember, there's no reason to become exclusive with someone from the opposite gender unless marriage is at least in view. This is the right time to become exclusive, to give yourself exclusive terms. This is the time where you can start saying, we are dating. It's more than just friends at this point. Because you see, this defines our relationship, the relationship as being committed and exclusive. And there is expectation. There is cultural loyalty that is kind of, the culture assumes there's going to be loyalty involved in that relationship. So that's step number 4. Let the relationship become committed when marriage is in view. And then finally, step 5, seek wise counsel and prepare intentionally. Again, this is the season to invite counsel from parents, spiritual leaders, spiritually minded, older, mature friends. Consider pre-engagement counseling. Work through the big questions before the engagement is actually announced, so that when it is announced, and God willing it is announced, you can move forward with clarity, confidence, and with Christ in the center. Now, I realize that much of what I've shared in this session today is very different than the vast majority of what our culture thinks concerning relationships with the opposite gender. I know that there'll be many here today that would be challenged in their thinking. And if you're challenged, I want you to ask this question of yourself. I'm talking about the younger ones, I'm talking about singles, I'm talking even about parents here today as well. Ask specifically, where does your view come from? What you disagree with, where does it actually root from? Where is it grounded in? Is it something that you've seen? Is it something that's come from the outside? Or is it something that's deriving from God's word? You're trying to give yourself a biblical pathway for going forward. I realize that for many in our culture, they would hear what's being talked about and say, this is just foreign. It wouldn't surprise me one little bit. In fact, I would say there's probably a number of us here today that would have an initial resistance to some of the things that has been talked today. I fully understand that changing one's perspective on some of these things, especially like a hot topic of boy-girl relationships, I understand it can take a process. So I'm not thinking that someone's going to come up and leave from here and think, hey, my mind has been completely changed. I'm not thinking that at all. And it's for that reason. If there's anything that I've shared here today that you're unsure about, if there's anything that I've shared here today that you don't fully agree with, I genuinely and I warmly welcome the opportunity for you to come and to talk it through with me. Please do that. Please come and speak with me. Please don't just disagree with a thought just because your initial reaction doesn't like it, or it doesn't depict what you saw on your TikTok reel or on your movie theater or whatever else. Please don't just disregard it without actually thinking carefully and biblically and deeply about that. Please, if there's anyone here today or anyone actually watching this today, I do ask that you would come and you would talk with me. And if there's anything that you're unsure of, anything that you don't fully agree with, because I genuinely love to hear your perspective. I'd like to hear your reasonings and your backing and your experience and your biblical warrant for why it is that you actually think differently. And I'd like to, if you would allow the opportunity, to bring further clarity to what it is that I've talked about here today, because I haven't even come close to exhausting what it is that could be talked about these things. I'm only scratching the surface with what it is that I'm talking. I've summarized it the very best that I can at this point in time. But I do want you to know that conversations do matter, and I do want to seek to walk alongside you the best that I can to help you in God's pathway for your life, and hopefully, God willing, towards marriage. And then finally, take the time to be preparing yourself. Prepare yourself, younger ones, teens, singles, mums, dads, whoever else, biblical counselors. Prepare yourself by reading good material. Read books, the little booklet we've got down the back there, it's called Help, I'm Confused About Dating. It's by a guy called Joel James. Please do go down and borrow that. I've got a heap of copies at home, actually. Do read through that. Read through it carefully and closely, and see what it has to say. It's a very small little booklet. Read things on role distinctions. Books such as What He Must Be If He Wants to Marry My Daughter by Vodi Balcom. We had our daughters reading that before they were 10. We were talking through them before they were 10. It's not only instructive for the male, but it's also very instructive for the female, because it's helping to understand the role distinctions that are actually there. Again, maybe not perfectly, there might be a few things little nuances you might disagree with. Fine, disagree with them, but don't chuck the baby out with the bathwater. Chew on the bones, chew on the meat, spit out the bones. And take that approach with that kind of book. Understand what biblical marriage is. We have a book down the back there. It's called This Momentary Marriage. It's written by John Piper. Or you can also read another book. It's called Married for God by Christopher Ash. These are good things. These are good books to open up your understanding and understand what are the biblical purposes for marriage. This is the best preparation for you if you're not yet married, if you're still a teen, if you're a child, if you're a teen, if you're a single adult. Take the time to prepare by reading good material. So I do hope that today has been a help to all of us here today. Let us encourage one another as we seek to establish a biblical pathway, a wise pathway from singleness to marriage. Let us pray. Father, thank you for this time now. Thank you that we have your word, and thank you that you've given us wisdom to know how best to apply your word. I do pray that you'd grant us grace as we seek to do this. And for those of us who are maybe struggling with some of these ideas at the moment, please be with them. For the parents that are among us right now that are helping their children from the younger ages right up to the older ages, please help them as well. And for the rest of us, Lord, help us to know how best to counsel from your word where these things are concerned. In Jesus' name, amen.